Welcome to another episode of Bright-Headed Publishing Podiobook Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. I'm so excited today because I'm speaking with author Ben Winter on his book, What to Expect When Having Expectations. I think you're going to really like the conversation. It's a great book, and Ben was a perfect guest. Welcome to the podcast, our newest member to the book club, author Ben Winter. Ben, thank you for being on the podcast and being a part of the book club. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's very exciting when I get to have authors come on, talk about their journey, and talk about their book. So my first question for you is, did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
No, it's something that kind of fell into my lap over time. Lots of different things got me here, and not just one of them could be pointed out as the cause and reason. But
somewhere along the line, you had a writer in you that just had to get out. Did you try to maybe ignore it from time to time?
No, I think when the time happened, and actually my first book was very, very easy to write. I had this pregnant moment in 2015 when I realized, hey, this is something I want to do with my life. And I just sort of sat down and said, okay, I need to be a published author because it sounds better. And so I just started writing this book, and it just was it took me no time at all. I think it took me 2 weeks to write it, and another 2 weeks to sort of smooth things out, make it better. But yeah, it was time. I needed to do it. I did it, and it was quick and easy. And so now I don't have that block saying I can't be an author because I have been an author.
Well, you are an author, right?
Yeah, I am.
So, it was the first book nonfiction like this book?
Yeah, apparently I'm really good at writing self-help books, and I'm not really good at reading them.
Well, that's okay. As long as the self-help books help somebody, that's the purpose, right? Is to try to help somebody. So yeah, that's really all that matters. What book is this? What number book is this?
What to Expect When Having Expectations is number 6.
Wow. So 6 years later, from 2015, you are now a 6-time published author.
Correct.
All nonfiction, all self-help books.
Yes.
Wow, and that's funny because you said that's not what you set out to be in life, no?
No, like I said, it was, in 2015, the idea that came to me was to kind of do improv training for businesses in life, not just for on stage. And it was kind of along those lines of creating that program that I have out there that generated that book, because then I figured, people will hire a speaker who's also a published author or a trainer who's also a published author. And so it just made sense for me to do that.
Nice.
And then I just sort of kept going from there to, okay, well, if I'm writing about it in general, what about if I get more specific? And then I wrote something specific. And then throughout teaching, that's when I came up with this portion around expectations. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I need to start putting stuff together, and bam, here I am with a whole book about it. So
yeah, we're going to get into expectations as well, because it's something that we all can relate to.
Yes.
But my question to you is, you self-published all your books?
Yes, I did.
So what was that like? What's that self-publishing journey like? You didn't know how to self-publish, did you, when you started out? So was it kind of trial by error, or did you know what you were doing?
It was a little trial by error. A lot of it was kind of working with and asking other people who have done it before what they did, and finding that mentor sort of situation. And a lot of it was trial and error, which I will say, having a graphic design background definitely helped the process, because you have to have the cover and the artwork and everything ready to go and in a specific format. And if you don't have that, then you're just sort of flailing around. So I can see why a lot of people charge a lot of money to get somebody published, because just the graphic design work alone is quite an undertaking. So
it can be a daunting task to get your book published, and especially if you don't know what you're doing, right? So self-publishing works for some people. I think when people self-publish, it's not the self-publishing that can be challenging, it's the marketing.
Yeah, very much so, yes.
How do I get my book out there? What do I do? How do I reach people? So what did you do?
A lot of it is getting out on interviews such as this. It's social media. It's telling friends and family about it and say, hey, I got stuff on social media, share it. And just hoping at some point that one or many of the different aspects will take off and get things rolling. And I think that's what it is it's that really slow start, and then something kicks in and bam, you got tons of book sales. It's popular, but
you got to keep going. So you got to get by that. You got to get by that slow part, right? That kind of inching along phase where really nothing's happening, but things are happening.
Yeah, it's one of those where you have to put in a lot of work up front, and then you get paid for it later.
Yeah, or you hope you get paid for it.
Yeah, hopefully. But at the same time, I've got my words out there. There are printed books in people's hands. So if I died tomorrow, I'm okay with it because I have my words out there. And if it helps somebody 10, 15, 100 years from now, awesome.
That would be awesome. And it's your legacy, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's what you left behind. So let's get into it. The book, What to Expect When Having Expectations. Now, I'm interested, how did this book come about?
So back when I was doing all the training for improv, one of the things that I would always come up during one of the rules of improv was around expectations. And I came to the realization that the only reason anybody gets upset is because an expectation hasn't been met. And I kept playing with that in my mind, and I was like, yeah, that holds true constantly over and over. But what do I do with it? That doesn't solve any problem. And that's when I kind of created this flow chart that I have. And at the top, it's like, you're upset. What do you do with it? And so I was like, okay, this is cool. Now I can take that moment of being upset about an expectation going unmet, and I can formulate something that works to get out of being upset. And then as I kept looking at that flow chart, I kept seeing all these little sections where it's like, did you know you had the expectation? No. Have you shared the expectation? No. All those no points in the flowchart led to something really deep. And so I decided, okay, I need to write a book about all this, about the flowchart, about all this stuff, but dive a little deeper, because not sharing an expectation is one of those things where it's like, why don't I want to share it? What am I afraid of? How come I didn't know I had this expectation until it's going unmet? Where did that come from? And I think that's where a lot of this, the book comes in, is flowchart's great. It's an awesome tool to practice with, but understanding a little bit deeper is why the book was written.
So when you're going through the flow chart and you're charting out your issue, does the book tell you like how to overcome, or techniques that you can, like when you really figure out, why didn't I share the expectation? Is there more in the book to kind of help us along the way to figure out how to share the expectation?
In a roundabout way, it's not as direct as that. Most expectations we don't even know we have until they're going unmet. And a lot of that stems from our youth and how we're raised, or how we're not raised, how we see society, our perception on things. And that's where, you'll grow up and somebody's not doing what you expect them to do in a relationship because you grew up in a household where everybody did that. And now you're together with this person where they don't do that. And so you're like, what is happening? Why aren't you doing these things that clearly everybody does? Oh, wait, that was my family. I don't know how you were raised. Got it. So it allows us to kind of explore where our expectations come from. So when we're not sharing it, sometimes we have an expectation that if I share something vulnerable, I'm going to get hurt. And I think a lot of times we just don't share things that perceive us as getting hurt by sharing it. And so there's a lot of fear behind sharing things, because what if I share my expectation and you're like, I'm not going to go with that. That doesn't work for me. When we talk about, or people talk about relationships all the time and deal breakers. It's like, I expect somebody to not smoke in the relationship. Well, that's a deal breaker because I smoke. Okay, well, it's not going to work out. So I shared my expectation. Now we have to break up. I'm being super like black-white here, but it's like, there's a lot of gray area, obviously,
right?
But it's one of those things where we're just that afraid of sharing some of those expectations, where on the other hand, maybe sharing that expectation creates a stronger relationship. It creates a better foundation, and now everybody's happier. So there's two sides to that coin of sharing it. But, how did we grow up? Did we share our feelings? Did we share thoughts? Did we share wants, desires, and then have them all shot down? And if that's the case, then our expectation is don't share it because you're going to get hurt. So that's not directly written in the book, but it's subtly there, because you have to explore where they came from and why you're not sharing, and you have to just take on that fear, and that's practice.
Right.
Getting out of the comfort zone.
But it's not reasonable to think that every expectation you have is going to be met. So don't you have to prepare for the expectations that aren't going to be met?
In a way, yeah, absolutely. And that's a part of the flowchart is this expectation reasonable? I do this to myself every time I'm in traffic. I expect everybody to drive because they took a driving exam. That's not reasonable because they had a different instructor, they had a different test, different time. Everybody's driving is different, plain and simple. So it's not reasonable for me to have that expectation. The expectation I should have is that everybody drives differently, and some days you're behind people you enjoy being behind, and other times you're out in front, and sometimes you're behind the worst driver you've ever seen. It is what it is. And so reasonable expectations, no. Sometimes we grow up with the most unreasonable views on life, and they're stupid, and there's no way that they can be reasonable as an adult. But we don't grow up necessarily being taught how to keep our thoughts and emotions in check, and to look at them again as an adult and say, I thought that when I was a kid. Does that serve me as an adult? The answer is usually no. Sometimes it is. I mean, using a fork and spoon and knife serves us when we're kids, and it serves us as an adult. So there's plenty of things we learn as children that do serve us, but there's a lot of things that do not.
So once you kind of figure out, this expectation is reasonable, it can be met, but it's going to take somebody else, because it sounds to me, well, not sounds, it is, that a lot of your expectations kind of depend on what sometimes other people do. So now your expectation depends on the actions of others, because like you said, I'm expecting you to do this, that, or the other. That can be complicated as well. Yes? Yeah,
and that's where there's this wonderful thing that we've lost touch with. It's called communication. Talking with one another. We just suck at communicating these days. And that's what it comes down to. It's like, here's my expectation. Is it reasonable? Yes. Do you agree with it? Well, no, I don't agree with it. And here's why. Okay, can we come to an agreement? Can we negotiate? Can we find middle ground? Absolutely. Let's find the middle ground of what works for both of us. And then you've negotiated and it's all working out. But oftentimes we're afraid that if we share, they're going to say no. Or, some people take the opposite of, they say yes to every expectation everybody else has about them, but then they're upset with themselves and their own expectation of themselves. I was going to say no this time. I was going to say no more often, and I'm saying yes. And so now they're angry with themselves because they had an expectation about themselves. So then they get to explore, like, why do I say yes to everything? What makes me the people pleaser, if you will? And so that's that. Again, sometimes we have expectations of ourselves that we didn't know we had until we're failing yet again on what we want for ourselves. And so it's the same process. You got to check in with yourself too.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you have to be able to meet your own expectations of yourself. I think sometimes you can over-expect from yourself, and that's never good. So there has to be balance, right? Do you help us with expectations and balance? Because there's got to be balance when we have expectations.
In a manner of speaking, absolutely. One of the things with expectations of ourselves is we're always going to hold ourselves to higher expectations than anyone else. I'm not entirely sure why. We always think that we should be better, do better, have more, help people out, whatever it might be. Now, there are some people who just are really good at saying no to everyone, and maybe they have an expectation of actually saying yes to something, to volunteer more or to help more, but they find themselves not. So, there's no cure-all for everything, except for being able to practice a process. So the flowchart's just a process of working on something that helps somebody get from an upset state to an understanding, a place of communication, and a place of peace, if you will. Just being able to kind of stop from being upset and say, okay, what needs to change for me? And how can I affect my situation so that I feel better? And sometimes that's a conversation with ourselves. Sometimes that's doing something for ourselves. Sometimes that's conversation with somebody else. And anybody that's ever done any sort of personal growth, it's not a quick fix. It's never a quick fix. You got to practice over and over and over. So sharing those things that are fearful of sharing, you got to practice. You got to just do it one time. And if it goes your way, awesome. If it doesn't, okay, do it again. Whether it goes your way or not, eventually it's not going to be a scary thing anymore because your life didn't end when somebody said no, that sort of thing. And the practice of I'm upset, let me do something different rather than just stew in it. We don't want to stew in it. Nobody really likes being upset.
Well, no, because that takes a lot of energy to be upset all the time, right? And that can be exhausting. So let me ask you a question, because everything you can almost tie to an expectation. You expect the sun to come up, right? You expect it to set at night. I mean, that's just, like you said, those are kind of the given expectation. But don't you have to expect yourself to actually run through this process and actually have these conversations with yourself at the end of the day to know that you can become a better person? But shouldn't your expectations be, reasonable? Because like you said, you're hard on yourself, right? So let's say you start this program and you want instant gratification. I want it now and it doesn't happen. Oh, it didn't happen. That's my expectation. I'm done. So do you talk about the process, or that it is not a time consuming, but it takes time to make changes, right, in your life?
Yeah, it does take time. And one of the things that I like about what I've created is that when somebody's having a problem, they're always like, how do I do something? Like the how is always the question. How do I change it? How can I fix it? How can I get the quick fix? And the answer to that is always a million different ways are of how. How I've created a flowchart. That's one how of stop being upset. There's probably a million other books out there on how to stop being upset, and none of them say anything like what I'm saying. But something like this flowchart is a tool that somebody can use to practice on a regular basis to do something different. At the most, the expectation should be, I am going to get there, even if it takes a lot of work and I have to practice over and over and over. I'm not perfect. I write this stuff. I'm a happier person than I think a lot of people are because I don't let myself get upset that often. And when I do, it's like, sweet, another growth opportunity. What expectation did I not know about? And so that's where I practice what I preach. I have this thing around my house all the time. I'm looking at it all the time. I created it, so it's all up there. But it's one of those things where, don't have the expectation that if you came across this topic today, you're going to be solved tomorrow. No, you got to do some work. You got to put that flowchart on your fridge, in your car, in your office, wherever you're most upset, and just constantly remind yourself to look at it when you get upset. And that'll be if nothing else, it's a quick trigger to say, oh, there's an option here. And
it sounds like, Ben, it sounds like it'd be a good tool for like middle school and high school children, and really start them with the critical thinking component and having them be able to walk through scenarios without being so abrasive, or teenagers don't think, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? They just tend to act. And so this flow chart would maybe help with starting to formulate that critical thinking process so that you can deal with issues, that you can set reasonable expectations, that you can be a happier person.
Yeah, and it's funny because I just talked to a high schooler. He's starting his own little podcast, and so I was helping out. But it was one of those things where it's like, high schoolers have tons of expectations of themselves and of the people around them. It's ridiculous, the expectations teenagers put on themselves. And one of the things that I've really come to terms with is that an expectation of yourself and the people around you is also another way of setting boundaries for yourself. I expect people not to cross my boundaries, but if you don't share what your boundaries are, what those expectations are of others, then, when they cross those boundaries, you typically get upset. But if you never shared them or, held true to your own boundaries and say, that doesn't work for me. Yeah, take a step back, or, don't say that about me, or whatever it may be. I would love every teenager on the planet to have this, to say like, oh, it's not weird for me that I have expectations of my friends.
Right.
For them to be there for me, for them to not make fun of me, to, have my back, to walk down the halls and not be accosted by the seniors who don't even know who I am. We have a lot of things as teenagers that we have to go through, and I think this would be awesome to teach in high schools. Yeah,
when I was, I actually did go and get the flow chart because I wanted to look at it. And when I was reading it, I thought, this would be great for teenagers, even those who are in college, just starting off. Critical thinking, that your flow chart just was so logical, but it also made you think about, like you said, your expectations, and not knowing that what you were having was even an expectation, right? So kudos to you. So I got the flow chart by going to the website. What is the website? So if somebody wanted it, they can get it. Because is it in the book too?
It is in the book. You can go to havingexpectations.com and you can download it for free. And then, if you get the book, it'll kind of go in more in depth to each of those steps in the flowchart. It'll walk you through it in much greater detail than just looking at it.
So, Ben, I know that you said this is book number 6. Will you just tell me quickly what the other 5 books are?
Yeah, so the first one is called Living Unscripted, and that's about using the tools and techniques of stage improv for everyday life. And the next, 3 books are Team Building Unscripted, Business Unscripted, and Relationships Unscripted, which are basically the same book, different examples that dive into those specific areas. Book number 5 is called Improve Your Self-Esteem, but it's improv with a small e. So it's a deeper dive into the Living Unscripted book, and more deeper dive into my past and how things might have been different had I had improv training when I was young. Because I had zero self-confidence when I was in high school. And I think things would have been very, very different in high school and college had I had improv training in high school or even before high school.
But maybe, so you can't go back and change it because it wouldn't have brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, no, I don't have any regrets about my past. I don't want to change it because, yes, I wouldn't be where I am today. But it's always interesting and fun to look back, how would I have handled that situation had it happened with today's knowledge? And
yes, if I would have known, right?
Yes, if I would have known.
The changes that I would have made, the things that I would have done. Yeah, I find myself doing the same thing too. Because now I feel like I know. Back then as a teenager, you think you know, but you know nothing.
Yeah. Something about the hormones from teenagers makes them really so stupid that they think they're smart.
That is so true. So true. So Ben, where can we get the book? Where can we get the book, What to Expect When Having Expectations?
So it's on Amazon. The fastest way, though, is to go to havingexpectations.com, and then you can click on the link there to buy it on Amazon. It'll take you directly, so you don't have to search for it.
Fantastic. Do you have any other books in the works?
I am working on a few others. The next one that I'm hoping to finish up is all about perception, in a way. A lot of people think that they're right about how things should be in the world that they live in. And guess what? They're right. And so are the other people that they disagree with. So it's a very interesting, it really messes with my mind as I explore it, because I don't want certain things to be right, but they are. And it's kind of frustrating. And I think I've sort of solved it, but world peace isn't that close, and unless everybody reads the book.
Well, perception is a perspective. Somebody once told me, your perspective is your reality, which when you really think about it, it's like, yeah, it really is, which may not be your perception, right? So I would be interested to see when you bring this book out and you publish it. You are now an official member of the book club, which means you can come back at any time. So when book number 7 is hot off the presses, I do expect you to come back and tell us all about it, because perceptions are just as equally as important as expectations.
Absolutely.
Ben, thank you so much for being a part of the book club and being on the podcast. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. Thank you for listening to another episode of Bright Headed Publishing Audiobook Book Club. I have been your host, Kelly Morgan. We just wrapped up with author Ben Winter talking about his book, What to Expect When Having Expectations. You can find the book on his website, havingexpectations.com. If you are an author or someone who supports authors and would like to be showcased on the podcast, email me at brightheadedpublishing@gmail.com. Once again, that's brightheadedpublishing@gmail.com. Next week, another author, a new member to the book club. But until then, keep writing.